All right, so today we're going to be going through another LD lesson, this time on weighing. Weighing is a really important concept to use in all forms of debate, I think, because it helps give like a semblance of balance and reasoning to the round. Without it, there's just a lot of ideas that are jumbled around, and it's up to the judge to decide who's going to win based off these multitude of different ideas that are disjointed and not connected to each other in any way except for the basic idea that one goes with the affirmative and one goes with the negative, which makes it really hard for the judge to actually decide which arguments are going to be the most important, which is where weighing comes in. And beyond that, you don't see a lot of weighing in LD rounds, despite it being one of the most important things to do in any form of debate. So if you are able to do it and your opponent doesn't, it definitely gives you an edge in the round. And I think it's one of the simplest skills to learn and one of the simplest to then put into your actual round, especially in the 2AR specifically, or just any voter issues. You can also put in the 2NR pretty easily as well. So, but with that in mind, let's get right into the lesson. So, the general concept behind weighing, as I already talked about, it's about connecting different ideas within the debate. And it's mainly going to come down to comparing an affirmative and the negative argument and arguing which one is more important. The main thing that this is going to come down to is our actual impacts and arguing which impact is the most essential to today's round. And obviously, you're going to say that your impact is more important and more pressing, and for that reason, we should vote for your side. Of course, as with everything in debate, there's no right answer as to which impact is more important. We have a whole bunch of different ways that you can argue that yours is, though. You make your impact the right answer. That's what weighing truly is about. There is one key phrasing that you should have whenever you are doing weighing. This is to make sure that you don't concede the argument that you're talking about, which is essentially to talk about an even if argument. This is just a great skill to know for debate in general. But what's great about even ifs is that you can pile on a whole bunch of different arguments. So weighing is operating under this assumption that what your opponent says is true and what you say is true. But with even if, you can basically first go and say, well, my opponent's impact isn't going to happen, and then deny their argument. But then you can go, but even if it does, it doesn't matter for these reasons, or mine is more important for these reasons. That's just a nice phrase to remember, because if you don't do it, then it sounds like you're conceding that their impact is going to happen, when of course you don't want to do that. You want to stand firm that their impact isn't going to happen, but even if it does, it still doesn't matter. That gives you multiple different arguments to win on, and if you win on any of them, then their argument falls. Another quick note to make before we actually get into how to weigh is that it isn't generally going to have positive wording. This is to say that you aren't going to say that your impact is better for the most part. You're going to be talking about how not getting your impact is bad. So let's, for instance, that's a bit of a hard thing to explain without a specific example, so let's look at one. Let's say that I am arguing that I'm going to reduce poverty. I'm not going to talk about how reducing poverty is good. I'm going to just talk about how poverty itself is bad. That's pretty much how all weighing is going to go. And then you're going to say that poverty is more important, therefore we need to be focusing on reducing that before we focus on reducing, a stock market crash, just as a random example. So that's how we get into this form of having very negative wording. So on that note, that's the basic concept of weighing, but let's go into all the different ways to weigh. Obviously, you're just going to be saying that yours is more important, but we need the reasons for why they generally are more important. So let's go through them. The first is going to be magnitude, which is essentially arguing that yours is more important due to the actual effect of the impact. This one is the one that comes most naturally to us, because it's literally saying yes, your thing just matters, it happens, but it matters less in society as a whole. All the other ones get into more specific ideas, but this is one that we can just connect back to our value and criterion and say that it just matters less to society. So obviously, looking at this like little example we got here, if we're trying to talk about whether or not stubbing your toe versus breaking your arm is worse, obviously breaking your arm has the worst magnitude. So if we're arguing about which one we want to prevent, we're going to say that we want to prevent breaking our arm first and foremost, because one of those things is much more important just inherently due to like the harm it brings about to you as a person. This one is the hardest to explain, but as I already talked about, it's the one that comes most naturally to people. And it's the one that if you just told, go say your argument is more important, they're probably going to come to this one. So it's okay that we can't really put a whole bunch of explanation into it. The next one is probability. This one's also really easy to understand, obviously, but it's just how likely your impact is to actually happen. Um, this one goes really nice with like a deny argument, because whenever you're denying someone's impact, you're saying that their argument really doesn't have any grounding behind it and it's not going to happen. So obviously, if something is more likely to happen, then we need to focus on that. If someone's argument has a very low chance of actually bringing about their impact, such as, let's say, arguments about nuclear war, because it's very unlikely that nuclear war is going to happen, right? So even though nuclear war is really bad, since it's super unlikely to happen, maybe we should still focus on other things that are still pretty bad, such as like reducing oppression, right? Because oppression does happen. So if we can reduce that, then even though like oppression isn't as important as nuclear war, it's still very important and it's actually more likely to happen than nuclear war. So it's still something that we should go towards first. Essentially, you want to focus on the things that are more guaranteed to happen than things that might happen. The next one is time frame, which is when the impact is going to start happening. It's important that we put emphasis on the fact that it's when it's actually going to start, because there's another one that goes for like how long it's going to last and when it's going to end. But obviously, if we don't start to see the harm like somewhat soon, then it's probably not as pressing of an issue. Especially when I'm giving this in a round, what I usually like to say is that we have time to fix the issue still. So if we're going to say that affirming the resolution like has the threat of like a stock market crash on the horizon, but it's going to be like a year down the road, then we can be like, oh, there's other things that we can do to help strengthen the economy and make it to where we won't see that stock market crash. Like we have time to fix the issue. Whereas you can be like, but if this other bad thing is going to happen in a week, then there's nothing that we can do. Like we simply don't have enough time to prevent it from happening. So that's the benefit of time frame. Outside of that usage, though, I don't find time frame overly useful in weighing, because like if it's going to happen farther down the line or now, doesn't really matter if it's still producing a bad thing, at least in my mind. But maybe it's persuasive to a lot of judges. I just personally don't buy that argument, and as a result, I don't really use it that much. The next one is scope, which is one of my personal favorites, probably besides magnitude and probability. It's my favorite, which is like the actual number of people that it affects. And obviously, this is just a really easy one to grasp, because if we're seeing more people harmed, then that's obviously bad. We give the example here of extinction versus 20,000 deaths. And yes, 20,000 deaths is awful, but like extinction is affecting way more people, obviously, because it's literally everyone on the planet. So it's like, well, it's pretty simple to see which one's more important, and that's because one affects more people than the other one does. We also have duration, which is a relatively simple one. This is what we were talking about with time frame, where instead of focusing on when it's going to start, we focus on when it's going to end when it starts. That was a bit of a weird way of wording it, but obviously the farther or the longer that something lasts for, the worse it is. If we're going to see this negative effect, such as like poverty, increase for a year versus a day, as we gave in that example right there, then obviously we're going to opt for the option that only sees the spike for a day. Lastly, reversibility, which is a very simple one, which is just simply, can it actually be undone at all? So whenever we look at things such as a stock market crash and extinction, obviously there's a multitude of reasons why extinction is more important and why we should try and reduce that before anything else. But one of them is that obviously extinction can't be undone. Once we hit that point, it's over and there's nothing we can do to solve the issue. But with the stock market crash, the stock market will come back eventually, right? Like, even if things are bad right now, we have the ability to make things okay in the future. So that's where reversibility comes from, and that's why I think it's one of the most strong ones. It's definitely the hardest to finagle, right? Because generally things are going to be reversible or they're not, and there's not going to be a real big argument you can make outside of that where you try and like convince your judge that it is reversible. It's just kind of the nature of the impact. But if it just so happens to work out that your opponent's impact is reversible and yours isn't, then that definitely gives us reasons why we should be focusing on your impact because, once it happens, it's done. So, but beyond that, those are all the different things that you can weigh on. Obviously, this was a very short lecture where I just threw a bunch of information at you, but personally, this would be the best place. Like, out of almost all the videos that I'm planning on uploading for like Lincoln Douglas lectures, this is where I would encourage you to go practice on your own the most because, like, we just do a lot of information there, and I think it's all a lot of good concepts. But if you don't actually work it out yourself, then you're not going to be able to hold on to a skill or apply it in your round. So what I personally recommend is going and finding a partner, choosing two impacts. If you need some, you can use a lot of basic ones that we see in LD, such as the stock market crash was one that we talked a lot about. Climate change is always a good one, or just global warming in general. Poverty is a basic one. Oppression, those are all great examples that you can use, and then you can try and compare them, and you'll weigh against each other, and the first person will go up and say that theirs is more important, and then the second person will go up and say that theirs is more important. And personally, whenever I run this drill with my kids, I try and force them to use every single one of these examples. As we talked about, reversibility is one that I'll be lenient on because sometimes you simply can't make it work. But I'll give them probably from about a minute or two to weigh and use every single example. Obviously, when you're actually weighing in a round, you're not going to be able to use every single one, and it's obviously not going to take you 1 to 2 minutes because, if you're spending 1 to 2 minutes weighing in the 2AR, then you just gave up like almost your entire speech. So obviously, for the sake of drill, it's just to make sure that you understand all the different weighing mechanisms. But otherwise, there's not too much more to say about weighing. It's just working on enhancing the skill and making it to where when you go into round, you are able to sufficiently convince your judge that your side is the more important one and the one they should be focusing on in the debate. So, but otherwise, as always, I hope this video was educational and helpful. I hope your guys' drills go well, and I wish you good luck in your